Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is a very big week for America and for the freedom part of the world. We have, I think, clearly the same kind of threat, if not worse, than we had before World War II. Went into World War II, we had Japan, we had Germany. After the Berlin Wall came down, we were hopeful the Russians would become kind of a normal country, and several administrations of both parties reached out to them, tried to help them come in the right direction. But it's pretty obvious by the end of the Obama term that the Russians were going to be just like they used to be during the Cold War. Of course, we had a new threat, and that was terrorism. We experienced it on 9/11. And so if you fast forward to where we are today, we have two big power competitors, Russia, China, Iran, funding proxies to come after us and other allies of ours through terrorist acts. The only reason I gave you all that is by any objective standard, this is a huge challenge going forward. We just experienced a very frustrating effort here, largely in my party, to get the funding to Ukraine. There's no good argument to oppose funding Ukraine. No good argument. None of our personnel are being killed. More than half the money being spent is being spent in this country, including in Kentucky and 38 states. Europeans are actually doing on the domestic side more than we are. And almost half of the NATO countries are spending more as a percentage of their gross domestic product on defense now, as we are. And as you know, two new members of NATO, Sweden and Finland, both of them with pretty sophisticated militaries. So they were an important addition to NATO. You heard the critics say, well, we ought to focus on Asia. Well, I think I'll quote the Prime Minister of Japan, who was just addressing Congress a couple of weeks ago. Earlier, he said, if you want to send President Xi a message, beat Putin in Ukraine. That's the view of the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, and the Australians. So this has worldwide implications. Finally, before taking your questions, where do we go from here? I think the Biden administration, even though we were largely on the same side on this particular issue, contributed to this whole mess in the following ways. Number one, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a huge mistake. We were not in combat there anymore. We were keeping the lid on. It was not a place where terrorists could easily operate from, as they did before 9/11. And if you were Vladimir Putin and you thought the single biggest mistake of the previous era was the breakup of the Soviet Union, and you've had your eye on Ukraine for a long time, it was almost like turning on a green light. So that gets us to another thing that I think the Biden administration has not done well, and that's to have adequate defense budgets. Every defense budget the president has submitted during each of his 4 years has defense spending not even keeping up with inflation. So looking forward, as I've said before to a number of you, when I move into my new role, I'm going to be focusing on this issue. I think it's the most important issue in the world. We need to step up and fund defense and foreign policy properly and play the role that we need to play for democracies around the world. They're all looking at us. Whether you want to be the leader or not, we are. And if we were to take the isolationist path and go in a different direction, they wouldn't love us. They'd come at us even harder. Finally, I would just say Ronald Reagan had it right. You get peace through strength, And that requires an annual commitment of trying to get our defense and foreign policy budget adequately financed, and that's our job in Congress. So with that, I'll see what you want to talk about.
What are the prospects for the Ukrainians to win this war?
Well, what were the prospects of us winning at Pearl Harbor? I mean, it's pretty hard to predict. But I can tell you the weapons that we're providing them are serious, effective weapons. And President Zelensky called me a couple of days ago just to say thank you, which I certainly appreciated. But part of winning is not just the equipment, but the will to fight. It'd be hard not to be impressed by the bravery of the Ukrainian people. And we're trying to give them the weapons they need to win. So I can't predict exactly how this ends. And I wouldn't even if I could, because it's their war, their bravery, and they're fighting for their independence.
I know Senator Rand Paul has been critical of you for advocating for Ukraine aid and recently called you in a recent op-ed not being fiscally conservative. What is your response to his accusation?
I don't have any response.
What are the prospects for Ukraine if Donald Trump wins back the White House?
Well, I think no matter who wins the presidential race, this issue is still going to be around. And I thought it was very helpful that the Republican nominee toward the end was not talking about this issue, had the speaker down for a press conference after the speaker had decided to let everybody vote. So I'm optimistic that no matter who wins the White House, you can't ignore the situation.
Could you go ahead and maybe switch gears to Israel? You know, we've got plenty of people that are just appalled by the escalation.
Speak a little louder, will you?
Yes. Yeah, could we talk more about the Israel package and, you know, what do you have to say to Americans, you know, like on college campuses that say we should not be supporting?
Well, first, let me address Israel, and then I'll address America.
Okay.
When you have a Democratic ally in the middle of a fight for their survival, we should not be telling them when they ought to have an election or what their military tactics ought to be. These are our allies. Second, I have been disturbed, and I hope this is not one of the campuses that I am talking about, with the level of anti-Semitism among younger people and the tactics. The university presidents, some of whom have resigned, need to get serious about order on the campus. Free speech does not mean you need to slug people. Free speech means you have an opportunity to listen to different points of view in a civil and respectful manner. And I think the sooner these so-called elite universities get a hold of their campuses, the better. But I have been disturbed by the level of anti-Semitism in this country. I thought it was over a long time ago. And I think that's another thing that's come out of this war. It's not just about the Israelis, but also about us.
Yes, but I mean, do you feel like we as the United States need to let Israel know how they should be conducting their offensives?
No, I don't think we ought to tell the Democratic ally whether or not they ought to have elections or what their tactics ought to be.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Do you think that that was the end of the line for congressional aid, U.S. aid to Ukraine?
I think it certainly takes care of this calendar year for sure. And then I think we'll have a new administration. They'll look at the one thing I hope, no matter who wins, happens, and I already said it, I'm going to say it again. The defense budget needs to get bigger, not just because of the Ukraine war, because of China and Russia and Iran. We are not adequately funding the pushback to the demands that we are receiving around the world. And as I said before, you can give up on them, they aren't going to give up on us. There's no chance.
So do you think the defense budget that Congress passes is going to be a lot bigger than what the president said?
It needs to be, yeah. Because the
What are the
latest,
prospects for that, though?
yeah, the latest submission from the Biden administration still didn't keep up with inflation. And while I'm using the word inflation, talk about something they deserve to be blamed for. The two things that really stand out. One is the chaotic situation at the border, and the other is inflation. Larry Summers, who was Bill Clinton's Secretary of the Treasury, said publicly in early 21 that if they dumped over $2 trillion on the economy, you'd have 40-year inflation. They did, and we do. So I've got plenty of complaints about the Biden administration, but I'm trying to cooperate with them to help Ukraine win the war. Okay, thanks everybody.
Two more finals left. Almost there. One paper left. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. The exit is over here, if you want to head and head that way. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.